Hey folks, some of you may recall that in a recent video I swapped out the miter saw in my miter saw station, and it's been a couple months since I've had this installed and I've got a lot of use on it, so I kind of wanted to follow up on a couple things. Three things specifically. Number one, adding these wings to either side of the station, or of the saw rather, and the performance gain that happened there. Number two, the saw itself, the performance of it, big thumbs up, and I swapped out the blade, which is a huge big thumbs up. And number three, the dust collection of the saw itself, not the station, the dust collection of the saw itself, which is a thumbs down. The dust collection on here sucks, and not in the good, fun, punny way of dust collection, which I'll get into that. So let me bring you in closer real quick and we'll talk about these wings. These panels on either side are just MDF plywood, 1/4 inch MDF plywood, nothing fancy, just something rigid. And the whole point of these is to block off airflow. You want to direct as much of this airflow into the dust collection box and being sucked out of the box through the dust collection system at the center of the miter saw, where the dust is being created, right at the blade. Anytime you can concentrate the airflow, concentrate the dust collection suction at the source of the dust, you're going to maximize the potential of that dust collection performance. I need some type of structure in the station to mount the panels to so they don't just get sucked into the station. I already have a horizontal piece that is inset above the saw. That'll work just fine. And to get something on that particular plane that's vertical, I'm just going to cut a couple pieces of scrap plywood and attach them to the inside edges of these side pieces. So very simple to just add some wings to either side. Now how I implemented these wings, or attached them rather, is a huge upgrade from my last setup. So you probably won't be able to see from here, but there's some holes in the miter saw station here and here where I had a screw going through this piece of 3/4 inch plywood into a 3/4 inch plywood panel behind it, and those are my wings from my last saw setup. That meant anytime that I wanted to tilt the saw, rotate the saw rather, cut an angle, I would have to use a drill or a screwdriver to remove one screw. Not that bad, not that inconvenient, but definitely not convenient, to remove this panel. And I lived with that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, something like that. It wasn't that big of a deal. But now that I was replacing the wings with something fit for this saw, I thought it would be much better to make them more convenient. So now instead of using a screw, they simply lift out of place via a keyhole slot. So very crude, I'll bring it in closer so you can see it. Very crudely cut right there. See that? That's a keyhole slot. Basically, I drill a hole right below a screw hole. So what I did is once these were fitting, I put some backing material on the side. There's already backing material on the top. I set it in place and screwed it down. Once I had the mount location set, I took these back off, drilled a hole a little bit lower than that screw hole, and then just connected them. It's kind of crude, kind of ugly, but it works really, really well. And it's fast and easy and convenient to implement. So there's no tools necessary. You just simply set it in place and push it down onto that keyhole slot. I think that is so convenient compared to what I had previously, and also much more convenient and easy to make than, say, embedding magnets somewhere, which is something else to purchase, right? So this little system works out really, really well. Both of them are easy to take on and put up, or take off and put on. I just thought that was kind of neat, something to think about here. So the saw itself, the performance of the saw, A lot of people asked me in the first video of the saw, well, did you cut it and check it for, cut anything and check it for square? And I completely left that out. I did cut some stuff and it wasn't square, but I loosened the bolts in the fence and adjusted it to where it was square. That's one of those things that you kind of do with any miter saw, in my opinion. Part of the setup process for a new miter saw is you loosen the fence bolts behind it to, well, make a cut first and then loosen the fence bolts behind it to adjust the fence just a little bit in either direction that's necessary to make a square cut. So while I didn't talk about that, I did do that, and now it's dialed in to cut perfectly square. I wouldn't trust any saw right out of the box. I'm always going to check it. I would always recommend checking it with a good quality square and setting it up properly. So performance, it works really, really well. I swapped out the blade on this saw to a higher tooth CMT blade, and that drastically reduced the noise, and it also reduced the amount of overspray from the saw blade itself with the dust blowing out everywhere. That saw is throwing dust all the way out to here. So my guess is that the really fine crosscut blade that I had on my last saw was taking smaller bites and just throwing the dust back. Smaller particles could be sucked up a lot easier than this pretty aggressive blade, making much larger chips. So I'm going to swap out the blade to a nicer blade, which I had planned on doing that already anyway, and then redo a couple cuts to see how bad it is. I was planning on cutting all that up because I thought it'd all get sucked up, but obviously not. Rather than taking the saw blade off my last saw, I still have it set up for portable use. I just picked up another blade. This is one that I got from Taylor Tools. It's the CMT Heavy Duty Cross-Cutting 12-inch 72 teeth with an alternating tooth bevel. I have a link down in the description below. You can use that link and a coupon to save 10% off of your CMT blades at Taylor Tools. With that last blade, this surface, this blue surface here, this case got covered with dust as well. Some pretty large chips. So I'm going to leave it in the shot and hopefully it doesn't get covered up. Alright, so a couple observations. First, this is way cleaner than the last time, so a lot of the dust is actually being thrown in the back. The blade is way quieter than that factory blade, but due to the way that this shroud is designed, when this is all the way down, the dust continues to come through. It's being cut in this direction. It comes through the top of the shroud here, and then comes and hits this clear plastic, and then shoots back down the bottom. So when this is all the way down like that, the dust is coming down the bottom of the clear plastic piece and shooting into the front of the wood, and that means a bunch of dust gets accumulated out here. The saw itself, great performance. The blade, great performance, and both of these are recommended. Now the not so awesome stuff, and that is dust collection. The dust collection, as I mentioned earlier, sucks on this saw. But before I point out why on this saw it's bad, let's first go to my last saw and see why that one was really, really good in this exact same setup. This is the saw that I took out of the miter saw station, and what made dust collection on this one really well in the station is this little port back here. As the dust is being created, there's a clear path to evacuate the dust from the back side of the blade through the arm and right out of this little port here, which you can hook up to a shop vac if you want. But this made dust collection pretty darn good in the station because it limited the amount of dust that gets shot into this shroud and spins back around into the front of the material. So what happens with this saw is there's no port over here that is in a constant relationship or constant distance to the blade where the dust is being created and evacuating it out. Instead, what we have is a couple shrouds down here for dust collection that really don't do much at all, because they only capture what is thrown back, straight back at the saw. Most of it's not thrown straight back. Most of it goes with the blade and rides around into this shroud. And the biggest problem is, as all that dust is starting to swirl around with the blade, when you plunge down and work your way into the front of a piece of material, especially a wider piece, that dust will start to come around the shroud into this plastic shroud and slam into the front of the material and then just spray everywhere else around the saw. So that's the biggest thing that's causing a lack of dust collection with this. The saw is not having a port up here in the top back area of the saw blade itself. Now, a lot of this has to do with perspective, right? So I wouldn't say that this is a tremendous amount of dust right here, right? That's not a crazy amount of buildup. But the fact that my last saw did not have any problems whatsoever with dust buildup, I didn't have hardly any dust on the floor with my last setup, just goes to show that the saw itself plays just as an important role in dust collection as the dust collection systems that you have in place to collect the dust. So, for example, in my last saw setup, I did not have this piled up of dust on the side. It's being shot into the front of the material and thrown off to either side. I did not have that situation like I do now. So that's basically it for this video. I just wanted to follow up with those few things and kind of document the whole dust collection system on this saw, because I think that's a definite need for or area for improvement, and I just showed one way that it can be drastically improved, just from my experience here. So that's it for this video. Go to my website, jayscustomcreations.com/newsletter. Sign up for my email newsletter so you don't miss anything else. You guys take care. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you in the next video.